Hey y'all, this is Brown at IF Brown, and today we're going to be talking about a guest appearance of Ghost Rider in another book, namely The Mighty Thor. So we'll be talking about issues 429, and that is Thor facing off against Juggernaut, and it's a pretty cool fight. And 430, and you got Thor and Ghost Rider fighting back to back against some rather hellish forces. So before I get into the actual plot and review, I do need to mention that while I am familiar with the character of Thor, I wasn't a regular reader of his book, and so I'm not really in the know on what was going on at this point in time, either prior to these two issues or after these two issues. I mean, I'm definitely more familiar with Ghost Rider than Thor, but that being said, the creative team does a really good job of, catching the reader up on what's going on, and so that way, even though you've literally just walked into this movie, type of, you feel is, rather prevalent, you're still able to, understand what's going on for the most part, kind of the basics. But the plot and the pencils were done by artist Ron Frenz. It's Frenz, I hope I'm saying his name right. And the script was by Tom DeFalco, with inks by, let's see, I gotta check, Joe Sinnott on 429, and Al Milgrom on 430. And all in all, I think this is a really good guest appearance for Ghost Rider. And on paper, having him guest star with, say, a more high fantasy-based character like Thor is something that could have, say, blown up in everyone's faces, because gritty urban horror, mixing up with, say, a more heroic high fantasy, type of book of Thor, it doesn't sound like something that would work. But it actually works out rather well, because on one hand, it's a good story for Thor, or at the very least, it's a good part in an ongoing story for Thor. And also, it's a rather well done guest appearance for Ghost Rider as well. In a sense that it continues his character development, in the sense that he's, still an unknown quantity in the Marvel Universe, both, to those around him as well as himself. So, things start off wherein Thor and members of the mutant team Excalibur are being held prisoner on an alien world, and the ruler of this world is Juggernaut. Yes, the X-Men villain. And so it turns out that Juggernaut had somehow come to this world and overthrown the evil dictator that had been running things, and that had been rather hard on the civilian population. And so in a roundabout way, Juggernaut ended up helping the world out. But unfortunately, because he's an evil individual at this point in time, Excalibur and Thor, both know that it's only a matter of time before Juggernaut starts to, say, become bored with this, idealized, setting that he's helped to bring about, and will start, causing trouble, for the population. And so it's around this point that they're actually freed from being held prisoner by forces loyal to the former dictator of the planet. And so he in turn holds Thor and Excalibur hostage, and makes Thor promise to help him out in reclaiming his empire from Juggernaut by fighting Juggernaut one-on-one and defeating him in battle. And so he's also holding the lives of the members of Excalibur hostage, to secure Thor's cooperation. And so Thor promises that he will not take action against the former dictator, and he'll only work to defeat Juggernaut. And so he sets out to Juggernaut's palace, and the two engage in a rather awesome brawl, and it's a two-way fight. 1 minute Thor is on top, and then the next minute Juggernaut's on top, and it goes back and forth. And so while Thor, with his Asgardian might, is able to hold his own against Juggernaut, Juggernaut is literally unstoppable, courtesy of the enchantment of the Crimson Gem of Sidorak, which gives him his power. And so there's no way that Thor himself can defeat Juggernaut in this fight. And so he does the next best thing. He gets him off the planet by throwing Mjolnir, his hammer, at Juggernaut to a point where Juggernaut, catches it, but Mjolnir just keeps going, and it literally takes him off the planet into space, a billion miles away to Lord knows where. And the last we see of Juggernaut in the story, he's, holding on for dear life to this asteroid, hurtling to an unknown destination. And so while we know that Juggernaut comes back to Earth, through some way, for all intents and purposes, at this point in time, Juggernaut was kind of screwed. And so, while that's going on, Thor, once he's without Mjolnir, switches back to his human identity of Eric Masterson, or his human alter ego, and he thinks to himself that, while Thor made a promise, not to take any action against, the former dictator of the planet, Eric Masterson made no such promise. And so, in his human guise, he talks to members of the civilian population and tells them that they've now been under the rule of two evil dictators, but they have a chance to seize control of their lives, to have power for themselves, power for the people, so to speak, and they don't have to live under a dictatorship anymore. And so, beyond him, encouraging members of the civilian population, he himself knows that he can't do anything beyond that. But then the members of Excalibur that had been held prisoner, they had actually managed to escape. And, they worked with, members of the civilian population to, defeat the loyalist forces to the dictator. And they chime in on, Eric Masterson's side, giving him support and, pointing out that, further pointing out that, that the civilian population can take control of their lives, for themselves. And so it's around this point that, Mjolnir returns to the world and to Eric Masterson, and he switches back to Thor. And so the civilian population ultimately decides to try things out for themselves. And, since, Juggernaut's not on the planet anymore, they decide that they'll, hold the, former dictator prisoner, to pay for his, crimes against them. And so, Thor and Excalibur, having done their part, leave the world and return to Earth. And what's been going on here is Eric Masterson's personal life on Earth is kind of in turmoil. He's going through a custody battle, with his ex-wife, over their son. And also, because of his frequent absences and his sort of, odd behavior in terms of, say, having a secret identity, friends and family members end up holding an intervention for him because they think he's an alcoholic. And so Eric has this moment where he's like, wait, what? But then it's not like he can just say, oh, no, you got it all wrong. I'm not an alcoholic. I'm Thor. I'm really Thor. Because the thing is, he's trying to keep his identity secret. He doesn't want people knowing that he's Thor. So he has to play along and pretend he's an alcoholic. But in a strange sort of way, this kind of works out in his favor because, his friends and family, they're able to pick up on the fact that there's been something troubling him and, trying to juggle, two different lives, and contending with all sorts of, troubles, of a Asgardian nature, as well as human troubles. I mean, it can, break anyone or cause anyone to struggle. And so his friends and family, promise to be there for him if he acknowledges that he has a problem and gets help for it. And this also wins the favor of his ex-wife. And, she, seems to, display a willingness to, if not outright get back together with him, then at the very least, cool down, the tensions that have been brewing between them. And, allow him to, see his son, or see their son a lot more than, that he would otherwise. And so, in a strange way, it kind of works out in his favor. But another thing that's been going on is that there is a group of villains that are enemies of Thor called the Wrecking Crew. And the leader of this guy is actually called the Wrecker. And they're in the middle of a rescue operation because one of their own had been captured by it was being held in custody by a police unit called Code Blue, which is a group of police officers that are specially equipped to handle superpowered villains. And this group of Code Blue members are setting up a convoy to take this member of the Wrecking Crew to a prison called the Vault, which is a facility to hold superpowered criminals. And so the Wrecker, the thing about the members of the Wrecking Crew is that they all have Asgardian powers. Like, they're ordinary humans who have been given Asgardian powers by way of the Wrecker at some point, having robbed Loki, of all people, who at this point in time was in a human civilian disguise as a businessman. And so the Wrecker broke into his building and stole some Asgardian artifacts, I believe. And these Asgardian artifacts ended up giving not only him powers, but once he shared them with his former comrades, they all got Asgardian powers as well. So they're as strong as Thor, or just about as strong as Thor. And a couple of them have these makeshift weapons that they're able to channel the Asgardian power through. In Wrecker's case, he has a crowbar, and another member of the team, a Thunderball, has a makeshift ball and chain that he uses to devastating effect. Whereas the other members of the team are basically they're all out brawlers. Like, they use their own bodies as weapons. And so Wrecker, though, he is able to focus his energy through the crowbar and find his comrade. And so that way they don't fall for Code Blue's ruse in trying to throw off any would-be comrades of this member of the Wrecking Crew, because they know that there's a good chance that someone could try and spring him. And unfortunately, for the Code Blue members, the Wrecking Crew is able to easily find the van that's holding their teammate. And while they do spring him, it turns out that this convoy is passing through Cypress Hill Cemetery, which is the stomping grounds of Ghost Rider, who at this point in time no one knows whether he's friend or foe. But and some of the members prior to this assignment, once they heard they were passing through Cypress Hill Cemetery, they were kind of creeped out. It's like transporting a supervillain's one thing, but going through the territory of someone who may or may not be something genuinely demonic or supernatural in some way, that's something that has them all on edge. But but after they've sprung their comrade, that's when Ghost Rider makes his presence known. And so while the Wrecking Crew was able to hold to easily take down the members of the Code Blue unit, Ghost Rider is someone that they were not prepared for. And so Ghost Rider is easily able to hold his own against the members of the team. And Wrecker is able to channel a blast through his crowbar at Ghost Rider. But something about the Asgardian energy interacting with Ghost Rider's hellish makeup ends up opening a portal to hell, wherein Mephisto, the Marvel version of the devil, shows up, and he's like a million miles tall, or at least he's up. He's up there, and towering over everyone. And he's demanding to know, who summoned him and why. And so this freaks everyone out, including Ghost Rider. And Ghost Rider's looking up at him, trying to figure out why, even though he doesn't know who this guy is, why Mephisto looks so familiar to him, like he knows him or something. And Mephisto, is kind of studying Ghost Rider as well. Whereas the Wrecking Crew, they teleport out of there courtesy of the Wrecker, because at this point they're all freaked out, because this evening, while they were able to free their comrade, they weren't expecting to go up against some genuinely, demonic shit, So, pardon my language there, but once they, get back to their hideout, there's sort of a, they're sort of calling into question Wrecker's ability to lead the team, because he's the one who ultimately made the decision to retreat from battle. And so Wrecker is someone who, because of his hardened life as a criminal, he feels that he cannot show fear in any way to others around him, especially his teammates. And so, like the teammate that they were able to, free, from custody, is grateful to him, but the other guys are kind of like, well, hey, if you're going to chicken out in a situation like that, what's to stop you from chickening out next time, something unexpected comes up. And so, Wrecker, he puts the other two guys in their place, physically, by beating the crap out of one of them at least, and, threatening the other. And so he says, okay, guys, you want action? Well, we're going to take out Ghost Rider and that big red guy, Mephisto. And so, it turns out that while this is going on, Loki, who has an ongoing vendetta not only with Thor, but against the members of the Wrecking Crew for stealing his powers, he finds himself in the awkward position of having to make a deal with Mephisto. And so he goes into Mephisto's realm, and the two of them sort of talk shop for a bit because they're both master manipulators, but they kind of cut to the chase. And so, while they're talking, Mephisto is, studying this artifact, which is the Soul Crystal that was last seen at the end of the original Ghost Rider series, wherein, the characters of Zarathos, aka the original Ghost Rider, and his enemy Centurius were locked in eternal combat, imprisoned in this mystical device. And so, he's studying this, and Loki's, asking him that if this, Ghost Rider, that has come onto the scene is, at all familiar to him, because Mephisto certainly knew, the one who came before. And Mephisto admits that, while this is not, the same one from before, as far as he knows, he is interested to find out more about him in his own time, though. But he's willing to help Loki in his, revenge scheme, in terms of, say, reclaiming, his powers from the Wrecking Crew, as well as arranging kind of a, confrontation with, Ghost Rider and Thor. And so, so after they've made their bargain, Loki also enlists the aid of a villain called Ulik the Rock Troll, who has a vendetta against the Wrecker as well, and the Wrecking Crew, but most strongly, though, against the Wrecker. And so, Loki sets about, manipulating, both Thor and Danny Ketch, who sees an illusion of one of the members of the Wrecking Crew running around from building to building. And so since he's got Ghost Rider's memories and remembers going up against them, he decides to basically tail the Wrecker, and he ends up transforming into Ghost Rider for the upcoming battle. And so once he goes after this illusion, he comes across one of the other members of the Wrecking Crew who sees him from afar and lets the other members know that, hey, Ghost Rider's on the scene. And so, the Wrecker and the other guys, they teleport, to where Ghost Rider is, and which is also, where Thor comes onto the scene as well, because once the Wrecking Crew rears their heads, he knows that shit's going down. And so Thor and Wrecker engage in a one-on-one battle, with one another, whereas the other members of the Wrecking Crew are trying to, hold back Ghost Rider to keep him away from, their boss. And so they're thinking that Ghost Rider is just, some dude in a, crazy helmet, in Halloween costume, but one of them grabs him from behind in an attempt to say restrain him, while the other guys can beat the crap out of him. But in the process, though, he rips the back of Ghost Rider's jacket, revealing Ghost Rider's spinal column, and this freaks the other guys out, because they're like, holy shit, this guy's a real demon or ghost or something. And so one of them runs screaming from the scene on the rooftop and right into the hands of Loki, who's been watching from the shadows, and he drains the guy and taking back the Asgardian power that was stolen from him. And he'd also taken out one of the other guys and leaving only two left, the Wrecker himself and, the guy that they ended up springing from the Code Blue unit. And so Wrecker, and while he's still locked in battle with Thor, Loki manipulates him into using his Asgardian power, to fire a blast with the crowbar. And he was actually, attempting to hit, either Thor or Ghost Rider, but Loki, made it to where, he, moved it, the crowbar, I mean, and, the blast ends up opening up another portal to hell. And this time, instead of Mephisto going through, Mephisto sends, like, a horde of his demons, into our realm. And so, once this happens, they swarm Ghost Rider and Thor, whereas, the Wrecker and, his remaining teammate, they're like, okay, we wanted Thor and Ghost Rider taken out, but this is not the way we planned it, but hey, we'll take it. And so, while, they leave Thor and Ghost Rider to the mercy of Mephisto's demons, they're trying to figure out what happened to their other two teammates, because they know that, I mean, yes, there's tensions in the group, but they're not, the type to say, leave each other hanging, as far as, say, their, fellow teammates and what have you. And so, sure enough, while the Wrecker is ambushed by Ulik, the rock troll, the other guy, finds, his two comrades, badly, hurt and, needing like medical attention. And he sees Loki, and, he tries to, warn the Wrecker, but unfortunately, Loki gets to him too and takes his power back. And so that just leaves the Wrecker against Ulik. And Wrecker is actually doing a pretty good job holding his own against Ulik and, basically just running on raw determination. But unfortunately, Loki, basically, attacks, Wrecker from behind and, renders him unconscious, and not only takes his power back takes some of his power back from him, but he, basically, saves him for later, because he intends to, subject him to a torturous process of, reclaiming all of his power, and as well as getting his revenge on the Wrecker from stealing from him in the first place. And so, so while Loki and Ulik, take the Wrecker away, for their own nefarious purposes, Thor and Ghost Rider are, fighting back to back against, these demonic hordes, and Thor ultimately uses Mjolnir to, close the portal, and in the process, creates a snowfall on the roof. And so the two of them, Thor and Ghost Rider, they look to, the other members of the wrecking crew that have been left behind, and they realize that these guys need help. And so Ghost Rider, tells Thor that he'll leave, the merciful act to him, because he's only concerned with vengeance, for the innocent and against, the forces of evil. And so they part on sort of uncertain terms, in the sense that, they met as allies this time, but they don't know if they'll be friends next time. And mainly because Thor remembers his encounter with the other Ghost Rider from a long time ago, and that Ghost Rider turned out to be a being of evil. And so even though his human host, was Johnny Blaze, was not evil. And so, they part ways, and the story ends on a bit of a cliffhanger, wherein back in Mephisto's realm, he studies a piece of embroidery that was being done by one of his minions, and it's like a soul tapestry, I think is what it was called. I don't remember if that's the exact name of it, but basically it's a tapestry that shows the face of someone who's about to die and whose soul is about to be sent to hell. And the face on this tapestry is Thor, and that's how the story ends, or at the very least this part of the story ends. So I really enjoyed this story, or at the very least, this part of the ongoing Thor story that was going on at this time. And even though I was unfamiliar with what was going on in his book, I think the creative team did a very good job of catching us up on what was going on, to where we understood without, say, having to have read a billion other issues beforehand, and so I also liked how they used Ghost Rider as well, because they made his appearance actually make sense, in the sense that it took place in New York City, and Cypress Hills Cemetery, since it's in New York City, the likelihood of him meeting up with a character like Thor is not outside the realm of possibility, and their interactions with one another were actually believable as well, because there's a lot of uncertainty there, because there's some wariness on Thor's part, and then as far as Ghost Rider is concerned, he's literally just concerned with vengeance on the surface, but at the same time he's at a loss as to his own identity. Like, he doesn't know who he really is, he doesn't know why he's doing what he's doing, and he doesn't know why this Mephisto looks familiar to him. And so there's not a whole lot of focus on Danny Ketch, but at the same time, though, I do like how there is a sense of consistency, not only with Ghost Rider but Danny Ketch in the brief amount of time that we see him. At least, you say, as far as consistency with how Ghost Rider was being portrayed in his own book at the time. And so because on the surface, Ghost Rider is just constantly making statements about avenging the innocent, or I am the spirit of vengeance, and so on and so forth. But in reality, in his mind, he doesn't know what's going on. And I like the fact that they kept that confusion going with his character. It's like he's at a loss as to who he is, but he still has a mission, and he's going to follow through on it. And And I really liked how he and Thor played off of one another, and it's funny because there is a bit where while they're fighting the Wrecking Crew, they're talking philosophy almost, in the sense that which one's more important, vengeance or mercy. And this is while they're fighting, mind you. And even one of the other members of the Wrecking Crew kind of lampshades this. It's like, they're beating the crap out of us and they're talking philosophy. What the hell? But at the same time, at the end of the day, they had each other's back against, not only the Wrecking Crew, but Mephisto's forces as well. And also, I liked, what we saw of, Thor and Eric Masterson. I liked how, in the first part of the book, or first part of the story, where they're on the alien world, how you have, Thor, when he goes up against Juggernaut, basically, being an all-out warrior, in the sense that, he's determined to win, but at the same time, he has a sort of, respect for Juggernaut, in the sense that, he recognizes, a fellow warrior who refuses to back down, even if he's on the side of evil. And of course, Juggernaut's characterization was pretty consistent with what's come before. And so, I liked, that we got to see what would happen, when Thor threw down with Juggernaut, because they fought before and other times since then, but seeing them in this fight, though, I liked how you got to see that, the fight went both ways. It wasn't just one-sided, and so that was pretty well done. And the members of Excalibur, I'm not too familiar with the characters on that team, maybe with the exception of Shadowcat, but it was cool to see that just because they were playing second fiddle to Thor, they weren't written as, say, idiots or something like that. Like, they had intelligence and strategies of their own, hence how they were able to escape from their imprisonment on their own, for the most part. And so and then of course you have Eric Masterson's depiction as a guy who he's able to, say, cut through the red tape, in the sense that he realizes that Thor made the bargain, but he himself did not, and that's how he was able to win over the civilian population, or at least play a part in helping them think for themselves. And so as far as Eric in his personal life, I thought that bit was a nice touch, in the sense that, I mean, yes, it was depressing when it came to, say, the depictions of, say, a custody battle, but at the same time, I think a lot of us can relate to, the stress of a situation like that. If we haven't been through something like that ourselves, then at least we know someone who has. And so, there's that, awkward tension, and there's that, sadness of, what could have been and what should have been, that kind of thing. But at the same time, I like the fact that you saw that both, Eric and his ex-wife loved their son, and their son loved them both, and so it's like they're trying to get along on some level. So I liked seeing that, at least. And I thought it was, touching and hilarious at the same time when his friends and family came together to, try and help him out and hold an intervention for him, because they think he's an alcoholic. And, it's like he has to play along with it, and I mentioned that before, but, it was nice to see that people actually cared about him, that he wasn't just a loner, that kind of thing. And I liked seeing, I'm not too familiar with the Wrecking Crew. I mean, I'd seen Thunderball in a really good Spider-Man storyline called Round Robin, The Sidekick's Revenge. And I've seen the Wrecker and a few other things, but this was my first time seeing the whole crew together. And so their dynamic was, rather interesting, because basically they were street-level criminals, who had been given godlike, power and strength, and you see how they'd actually use something like that. But Wrecker, though, was a fascinating character for me, because he reminded me of Jon Voight's character from the movie Runaway Train, which, great movie, check it out if you get a chance, one of Jon Voight's best performances. But, it's one of those cases where it's like, much akin to Jon Voight's character, Wrecker is hands down a bad guy. He is a villain, okay? But in some way, he's strangely admirable in a strange sort of way, in the sense that he's loyal to his crew, and he's the one who masterminded the plan to free their team member who is being held captive by the police, and whereas the other guys are kind of like, forget him, but basically he was loyal. And so that was pretty cool to see. Whether you're on the side of good or evil, loyalty is admirable. And also the fact that, he's willing to, in private, acknowledge his fear of going up against someone like Ghost Rider and maybe Mephisto, but at the same time, because, of the type of person he's become over the years, the personality that he's enforced over the years, he can't back down, even if he's scared shitless. He has to keep fighting. And so, and also if he shows any fear, his leadership is called into question, as shown when, the other members of the team are kind of like, hey, what's going on? Well, why did you chicken out? And so he's constantly having to enforce his leadership and his, and his strength and power over others. But at the same time, when it comes to, say, his fight against Thor and Ulik, you saw someone who, if not, even if he wasn't in the same league of strength, like he had, Asgardian level strength, but he wasn't like, say, straight up Asgardian, like, say, Thor or Ulik the Rock Troll, so he's probably weaker in that respect. But at the same time, he held his own against both of them, and he was refusing to back down. Like when he was fighting against Thor, the only reason he broke off with him was because Loki manipulated him. And when he's going up against Ulik, the only reason that the fight stops is because Loki takes his power back, or at least incapacitates Wrecker so he can take his power back. But what little we did see of the fight between Wrecker and Ulik, Wrecker had Ulik on the ropes, and so going up against an Asgardian rock troll, is no small feat. So that was pretty cool to see. Okay, so the only problems I could think of are that, as I mentioned, you're coming in on the middle of an ongoing story, and while the creative team does do a good job of catching us up on what's been going on, there is still a sense of unfamiliarity if you're not say reading Thor, or at the very least you haven't read the stories prior to this issue or what happens after. Because I found myself, while I was reading these two issues, for the purpose of checking out a Ghost Rider guest appearance, since I'm kind of on a Ghost Rider binge right now, I found myself wanting to know what happened next with Thor. How does the custody thing go? What happens to the Wrecker? Obviously the Wrecker survives because he turns up later in other stories, much like Juggernaut. But at the same time, that because Loki has a vendetta against him, that his plans for the Wrecker can't be pretty. And so, it's like I'm hoping that Wrecker doesn't get hurt too badly, so to speak, or at the very least, it's something that can't be fixed, or it's something that can't not be fixed. But anyway, yeah, you're left wondering, what happens next, or how did we get to this point? It's like we get the abridged version, but we kind of want to see the whole version, and that's the only downside as far as being kind of an outsider of the series entails. But the other thing is, there is a lot going on within these two issues, story-wise. And, for the most part, they do a good job of, the creative team does a good job of balancing things out. But there are two instances I can think of wherein, because of all the stuff going on, there are two instances that are in and of themselves, rather cool, but they're underutilized. And they're too short in terms of what they show, namely when Ghost Rider and Thor are going up against Mephisto's demonic horde. What little we do see of it is pretty cool and scary in its own way, in the sense of being swarmed by a bunch of demons. That would be scary for anyone, but the way it's shown being resolved, while it does make sense, from a strategic standpoint, with Thor being able to use Mjolnir to channel Asgardian magic and close the portal, it's resolved within the span of, say, a page or two. And so, it's like you have this potentially terrifying moment, and while visually, it's like, oh shit, it's resolved, far too quickly. And so, while the picture that's shown on this cover, it does happen, it's kind of one and done. Whereas, this cover is a lot more, true to what happens within this, the majority of this issue, because for a lot of this issue, Thor and Juggernaut have a knockdown, drag-out fight. So, yeah. But the other thing was, another instance that I thought was, undercut was Wrecker and Ulik fighting one another, because there's obviously a history between the two, based on their dialogue, and because we've kind of been with Wrecker within these two comics, we're kind of pulling for him in a sense that we want him to at least put up a good fight against Thor, which he does. But when it comes to Ulik, though, you've got this raw, bit of anger and human determination to, triumph over, a legitimately supernatural foe. And so that was something that, even though Wrecker was a villain, I thought was, rather relatable. And so, unfortunately, we only see, I think 2 panels of Wrecker and Ulik fighting. Like, you see Ulik ambushing Wrecker, But then you see, and the next time we see him, Wrecker literally has Ulik on the ropes, like Ulik's on the defensive, while Wrecker's going all out on him. But that's when Loki comes in and takes his a lot of his power back from Wrecker and incapacitates him. And so I wanted to see more of that fight. Like maybe if they'd had a page or two, with several panels, showing the fight, that would have worked out better. But so yeah, that and the resolution of repelling the demonic horde were resolved and done far too quickly, in my opinion. But all in all, though, this was a good bit of an ongoing story, and it was a really good guest appearance of Ghost Rider, I thought. And I did like the fact that there's at this point in time, Ghost Rider is treated as something as an urban legend, as other reviewers have pointed out at this point in time, because no one knows if he's good or evil. I mean, not even Danny Ketch, his human host, knows if he's good or evil for sure. And of course, you have Ghost Rider, with him questioning his identity. But also you see how other people view him. Like you saw how the members of Code Blue were creeped out by him. And you saw, Thor's, cautious, error around him, in the sense that he knows that the one before was evil. So, but can he trust this guy? And then of course, you have the Wrecking Crew finding out the hard way that Ghost Rider actually is a demon or a ghost. And so yeah, I mean, I liked how Ghost Rider was portrayed, in this guest appearance, and also. Yeah, I thought they did a good job of, catching the reader up on what was going on. And so you had a bunch of stuff happening, but for the most part, it didn't feel too cluttered. And it actually made me more interested in what was going on with Thor. Like, I don't know about going out and buying a bunch of back issues, because I already got enough, books to look through as is, as I've mentioned before. But at the same time, it did make me appreciate Thor more as a character. So... and you had some good villains here, and I liked seeing Loki and Mephisto trying to outwit one another, while at the same time being honest with one another, because they're both fellow manipulators. And of course, the bit of villainous valor that we see with the Wrecker as well as Juggernaut, I thought was pretty cool, in a sense that it made the villains more compelling. And so you have good heroes and good villains that are well written, and some good artwork by Ron Frenz. And it kind of brought to mind some work by, say, Sal Buscema, as well as maybe his brother John Buscema, as well as a little bit of Jack Kirby as well. But mainly with the Asgardian elements. But on the other hand, when it came to, say, Code Blue and Ghost Rider, the artwork was more akin to, say, the work that was being done in Ghost Rider's own book by Javier Saltrez and Mark Texeria. And so I thought it was like a good blend of artwork and style. So I'm going to go ahead and give these two issues 4 out of 5 stars. This was a good guest appearance, and I really enjoyed it. And if you get a chance, you gotta check them out. That's Thor 429 and Thor 430. So yeah, 4 out of 5 stars. So hope you all enjoyed this review. Thank you very much for taking the time to check it out, and hope you all have a good day. Take care. And if you want to drop a line, please let me know. And if you like what you see here, please feel free to like and subscribe. So take care. Bye.